He basically mentioned that under the Trump administration, they've recovered, as he says, tens of trillions of dollars of stolen wealth, which conceivably could be used to address the national debt and also put in place some sort of facilitation back to a gold standard.
The land of Arcadia.
Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you on Friday, August 24th, 2018 for this week's weekly market wrap-up on behalf of Arcadia Economics. Certainly a lot of fascinating things happening, certainly escalating, and right at the top of that list, I just put a post up on arcadiaeconomics.com with a rather wild story that, again, everything is there so you can dig in and read it, decide for yourself. But basically, this is the second analyst. There's an interview with Wayne Jett on Sarah Westall's YouTube channel where, amongst other things, he basically mentioned that under the Trump administration, they've recovered, as he says, tens of trillions of dollars of stolen wealth, which conceivably could be used to address the national debt and also put in place some sort of facilitation back to a gold standard, with the premise being, and he mentions here about recently Trump operation in Singapore, and that the reason for the large naval presence had to do with recovery of large stashes of gold that have been taken from the country. One of the things that's interesting is because I've heard something similar. Jim Willey has been reporting on this and has also mentioned that basically the Fort Knox gold has gone, and a lot of the gold is gone, but that it is actually being recovered. So full disclaimer, I couldn't tell you if any of that is true or some degree of true, yet given that both the other things that Jett and Jim Willey talk about that I am familiar with and what they talk about in regards to the development of the dollar, that does match what I've been seeing. So, you know, what to think about this one. Well, I'll leave the article up there for you to read. Again, it's right, first one today on Arcadia Economics. And wow, I mean, just when you think about it, that, because actually there are those reports that the Rothschilds have over $500 trillion of wealth. I remember I was stunned the first time I heard that. Again, I couldn't say whether that's actually accurate or not, although I believe that there could be some truth to that. You know, and again, there is the report from Dr. Mark Skidmore and Catherine Austin Fitts about the Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Department of Defense losing $21 trillion, with, so far, to my knowledge, the only government response being to take the accounting documents off their website. So who really knows where all this money goes? But you would think, I mean, in some form, it's still out there. And again, it's almost surreal because I think a lot of people, myself included, have gotten used to seeing whether it was John Corzine and his fund or any of the scandals that go on. And it's almost amazing where you just almost lose faith in the justice system. Yet the money's been stolen, which that part I do believe it has been. And it's actually being recovered and used to pay off the national debt. Well, maybe I'm hoping that's true. I don't know. But in either case, certainly in the least fascinating to think about. Again, I do get the feeling things going on behind the scenes are much different from what we are told. Although, speaking of things that are happening in front of our faces here, Treasury unloads on Moscow. Washington freezes assets and Safari resets it. But there we go again. And I put this one in here just because we've seen the meeting between Trump and Putin, and yet you see the tension continue to escalate. Same with Turkey and Washington placing a lot of sanctions, which, whether this particular action in and of itself is monumental or not, yet when you think about where is this relationship going, Again, at least just based on what's reported publicly. I've often wondered if maybe when these guys go and have the meeting, whether it's Obama or Trump gets in there with Putin, they have the cameras on and they go behind closed doors and they're just doing keg stands for all I know. It's often hard to know what's genuine or not, but again, on the surface of it, not good relationships developing there. Here's an interesting one. Germany calling for a global payment system independent of the U.S. Again, we've seen this with China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, other nations where they're getting frustrated with this dollar hegemony and saying so long. Yet back here in the U.S., Dallas Fed president says 3 or 4 more rate hikes then assess course ahead. Well, I could take a pretty educated guess about what will happen if they do the 3 or 4 more rate hikes. You'll continue to see the real estate market weaken. And actually, at some point, you would think you would even see the stock market slow down in the U.S., although so far that has not happened as the S&P touches an all-time high. I think the NASDAQ reached an all-time high this week as well. In either case, I did look up how if you go from 2009, really the bottom, until now, the NASDAQ has gone up by a multiple of 7. Which it's just stunning what happens with the printed money, which is why it makes it even more stunning that here is silver still sitting slightly below the average cost of what it takes to get it out of the ground. So silver has not moved much over this past decade. Gold up maybe 50%, yet when you have the greatest monetary expansion in history, again, you see it in the stock markets going nuts, yet precious metals are still low. And again, nothing has changed my opinion that that's the reflection of a lot of banks selling paper contracts, which actually, let's put a twist on that, because based on, and again, there are experts who can speak to this far more eloquently than I can, and certainly I'd recommend checking out Ted Butler or Dave Kranzler, who dig into the COT report, which basically shows who's buying and selling these contracts. And amazingly, it appears as if the banks who had this massive short paper position have been able to pawn it off over the tech funds that basically sit there and read the charts, yet, in my opinion, have not realized that, be careful here, but a bank that sounds like the letter J, allegedly knows that they're sitting there reading the charts and has been fleecing them for years. Again, want to be careful how we phrase things legally here, but that's my basic understanding, that the banks have a pretty good idea of what the tech funds are doing, have been fleecing them. And certainly, so it's interesting because now the banks as a whole are very long the silver market, again, providing me with belief that we will see the move higher that I've been talking about for so long in our near future, hopefully sooner than later. And lastly, a quick look on the cryptos. Bitcoin getting back up there a little bit, 6,600. My beloved Litecoin still struggling at 5,770. Yet again, certainly a challenging time if you're a crypto owner. A great time if you're just thinking about getting invested in the cryptos. Again, this is not legal financial advice, but rather just sharing my own thought process of how I've invested. And again, when you see all of these problems with the establishment currencies that to me seem beyond a shadow of a doubt unsustainable, and realizing we have to go somewhere, and again, reported before on the continuing developments, whether Amazon or Starbucks is going to start accepting, yet you have the double-headed monster of a failing currency system and also, you know, growing adoption. Now, once the system fails, I think that's when the adoption will go into overdrive. Will that happen this year? Certainly the whole, you didn't even mention Deutsche Bank today, or the Turkish crisis, but certainly I'm curious to see what happens when the banking system really runs into trouble. If it has not happened before then, certainly I think the cryptos and the metals, that will be when they shine. With the caveat that, again, from the same standpoint where you see other nations run into trouble and people buy treasuries that are usually more insolvent than the debt that they're fleeing from, yet in the short term, things do happen. Even before gold and silver had their big rise back in 2011, when the crisis first hit, they traded a lot lower. So be prepared for the possibility of that happening. But again, if you're looking at these things from the long run, I continue to feel that both well-selected cryptos, not just any of them, but ones that have legitimate business case. Again, Litecoin is remaining my favorite. So good cryptos and gold and silver, I believe, will serve you well. I continue to steer clear of the stock market myself with very few select exceptions. And it's going to be fascinating to see how it unfolds. So with that said, I hope you're having the start of a great weekend, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks.